Hi, I'm Ted Pattison from Critical Path Training. I'm very excited to introduce to you a new set of developer tools built into Visual Studio 2010. These tools are known as the Visual Studio 2010 SharePointTools. Now, to reflect back on what we had before this new tool set, back in SharePoint 2007, I would say most developers that you talk to will agree we had a fairly limited development experience. And there were a large number of SharePoint developers who would simply create class library projects and start adding batch files and very contrived directory structures to be able to participate in SharePoint 2007 development. Now, from Microsoft, we have the Visual Studio extensions for WSS 3.0, as well as a separate effort for 2 workflow project templates built into Visual Studio 2008. And there were plenty of developers that used those, but not there was really no consensus about what was the best approach. There were lots of different projects on Codeplex. WSP Builder probably is the most common one. STS Dev was another. So there was lots of different approaches, and I think what we saw was that the developer community was somewhat fragmented because there was no universal approach that we all used. Now, other problems that we've had in the past is that we need to manually edit things such as camel files, which is hard to do. We have had to be very conscientious of creating batch files to build out a solution package, which is basically a cab file with a WSP extension. And we also, quite often have to be very mindful about the SharePoint root files directory. And as we create things like application pages and style sheets and list definitions and site definitions, I had to be very deliberate about knowing where I wanted each of my files to go. And I basically had to know about the layout of this SharePoint system directory structure. Now, with the SharePoint tools, many things are changing. Now, first, let me point out that the Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint tools are dedicated to SharePoint 2010 development, so you can't use them to develop for SharePoint 2007. But when all we are working on is SharePoint 2010 solutions, it's going to give me an end-to-end developer story. And what we'll see is that it does give us a very comprehensive story where we're not going to have to go out and use other utilities. So there is a SharePoint Explorer so that I can quickly look at the different site collections that are on my local farm as I'm doing development. There's going to be new templates in Visual Studio for creating new projects and project items with the SharePoint tools. There is also a migration path. If you have been creating code with the Visual Studio extensions for WSS, there is an import template that you can simply create a new SharePoint Tools project and point to your old project, and it's going to take it through an importer to change all your code and restructure the project to how it should look inside this new world of the SharePoint 2010 tools. Now, the best thing about this new tool set is that it was designed from the ground up with extensibility in mind. Now, the fellow who is kind of the brainchild on the product team behind this, Mike Morton, has worked hard to create project templates for application pages, for list definitions, but from the start, he knew that he wasn't going to be able to provide every single template for every single situation. He also knew that there were plenty of people, such as the SharePoint MVP community, who had a lot of knowledge, far more knowledge in his team about SharePoint and how it works internally. So from the get-go, his tool set was designed to give us a basic project structure for doing SharePoint projects, but also allowing developers to create add-ins, extensibility pieces, so that we can add extra project templates and project item templates if we want to automate adding in components that reach all the dark and unknown crevices of SharePoint and its development surface. Now, some of the benefits that we're going to get is that when we create a project with the new SharePoint tools, we really don't have to think in terms of the solution package and how it gets built. It just all happens behind the scenes because of this new project structure. also, we don't really have to worry about the structure of the root files directory. So my files can be put at different places inside of the project without regard to where they're going to be physically deployed, because of the design and the architecture of this tool set. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at is something called the SharePoint Explorer, which is a simple add-in utility that we get with Visual Studio. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at it. I'm going to start up Visual Studio and give you a quick demonstration of how the SharePoint Explorer works. Now, in our demo, I have this site, and it's a site on my local farm. So as I participate in SharePoint development, just like in 2007, typically I build a single server standalone farm. So my farm's playing the part of the SharePoint web front end, and also it holds the database. And whether I build that into a virtual machine image, or whether I have a machine where I have a native install of Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 R2, it's all the same. But the main point is that the farm has to be local for what we're about to do. Now, we'll go ahead and we'll start up the new version of Visual Studio 2010. Look at that new splash screen. Very lovely. And there's something inside the Server Explorer which has SharePoint Connections at its title. This is the SharePoint Explorer. And so there's the ability for me to choose Add. And as I choose Add SharePoint Site, I can add any site collection that's in my local farm. Once again, you can't reach across the network. This is for site collections in your local farm. I've already connected to this right here. And as I drop this down, what I'm going to notice is that it shows my top level site, and there's its name. As I drill down, I can see a collection of content types, a collection of features, a collection of list templates. As I drop these down, I can see that there are the different types of list templates that are available for creating lists inside the site. And also, let's look at the different lists and libraries. So there's only one list that I've created inside my site, the contacts list. Now, note that the nodes inside the SharePoint Explorer are read-only. So what you're not going to be able to do is right-click and delete a list. Now, that being said, the SharePoint Explorer is extensible. So any developer can create a custom node to add in to the SharePoint Explorer. And as you create custom nodes, you could very well decide that you want to put read-write functionality inside there. So maybe inside of your node, you have a right-click menu option, which allows you to delete the objects that you're showing. Well, you have to program against the object model to do that. But just using the SharePoint Explorer out of the box, it's read-only, and one of the more useful things that we're going to do is go to the site itself or a particular list and right-click and say View in Browser. And that's just going to give me a quick way to bootstrap inside of the browser as I'm doing development.